Okay, so this is part two, titled Emergence of National Awareness and Theater in Croatia. So, in order to get to importance of national theaters in Croatia, we have to shortly elaborate on the general beginnings of the theater. So, the first mention of theater in Croatia dates somewhere in 11th century. It was mainly performed in churches as liturgical drama and in open public spaces, but this form of theater had no fixed repertoire and the number of performances depended solely on the goodwill of the participants. Theater with continuous program and repertoire emerged at the beginning of the 17th century again in churches, in monasteries, but the important occurrence happened around 1780. It is the year that we have the oldest records of German acting troops appearing in Zagreb. So, as I mentioned before, German language had great influence on Croatian language and theater, but why did these troops appear in Croatia in first place? There are two answers. First and most obvious was profit. These troops had no full-time ensemble. They were made out of actors of questionable qualities and skills, which were not very expensive to hire. So the director of the troupe would gather them and come into town to ask permission to play their repertoire. They had to pay some amount of money to city council, spend something on rudimentary equipment and various expendables, but there was enough left for them to make a decent profit. They played, of course, in German language, and their repertoire consisted of a lighter program like popular German and French comedies and farces. Second reason for their appearance was the German belief that theater and acting troupes have an important role as an educational tool for affirmation of the German identity and language throughout the empire. And that is exactly what they did. These troops were bringing a breeze of European theater stages to Croatia, cultivated at least some form of public theater, and spread German influence through language. But it was a double-edged sword. On one hand, it brought all the positive influences I mentioned, but on the other hand, in some ways, it oppressed the emergence of Croatian language, Croatian authors, dramas, and eventually emergence of Croatian theater scene. Best example is that German newspaper circulation was 3 times bigger than Croatian, or that there were 200 to 300 Croatian books printed a year and over 1,000 German books. So on one hand, German acting troops prepared the field for emergence of Croatian theater, cultivated the audience, but in the long run, it weakened Croatian language, caused lack of authors and literature, problems with repertoire, created questionable habits and taste of the audience. Evidently, something was missing in Croatia. In order to realize what, you have to be aware of the fact that across the Europe in 19th century there was the emergence of constitutional and democratic nation states. So basically there were many countries across all the Europe, and at some point of time in 19th century they started to experience the rise of national awareness. This point in time is named culture wars because it touched virtually every sphere of social life: schools, universities, press, marriage, gender relation, all sorts of rights, control of public space, folk memories, symbols of nationhood, etc. So one of the most important tools in such revolution is mass media. And what could have acted as a mean of mass media in 19th century? Newspaper and theater. Both were public, reached massive audience, were used as a tool to proclaim political attitudes, and most importantly, materials used were written and performed in every nation's mother tongue. This movement started in Croatia around 1813 and lasted till 1874 and was called Croatian National Revival, or in Croatian Hrvatski narodni preporod. It is also known as the Illyrian movement, or in Croatian Ilirski pokret, a pan-South Slavist cultural and political campaign with roots in the early modern period and revived by a group of young Croatian intellectuals during the first half of the 19th century. This movement aimed to create a Croatian national establishment in Austro-Hungarian Empire through linguistic and ethnic unity, and through it laid the foundation for cultural and linguistic unification of all South Slavs under the revived umbrella term Illyrian. So the most distinguished person of the movement was Ljudevit Gaj, and his book, Brief Basics of the Croatian Slavist Orthography, It was printed in 1830 in Croatian and German, and in it Guy advocates for purity of the Croatian language. He also started first newspaper in Croatian language under the name the Croatian News, which were approved by the king and were a symbol of affirmation of the Illyrian cultural program and affirmation of united standard Croatian language. In his time, many public reading rooms were opened where people could read materials in Croatian language, and in the Illyrian library, Croatian theatre was opened in 1840.